Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Wednesday, June 25th, 2025. President Donald Trump says the leaked U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency report suggesting Iran's nuclear program has been set back only a few months after the recent U.S. bombings is wrong, and the nuclear sites have been destroyed, or in his word, obliterated. And the reporters who published the DIA report findings are bad people, he says, sick, and are demeaning the hero pilots who carried out the U.S. attack. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention Director nominee Susan Monarez questioned at a Senate confirmation hearing about vaccines. She calls them life-saving and says she has not seen evidence linking them to autism. Senate Commerce Committee approves Bryan Bedford, the CEO of a regional airline, to be FAA Administrator, sending the nomination to the full Senate. The claims of a Justice Department whistleblower who says the Trump administration planned to disregard court orders that would hinder immigrant deportations comes up at several Senate hearings today with the Attorney General Pam Bondi and with former top Justice Department official Emil Bove nominated for a federal appeals court judgeship. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell again points to the threat of inflation from President Trump's tariffs for not cutting interest rates. Today he was before the Senate Banking Committee. And a surprise win in the New York City mayoral Democratic primary. Susan Monarez, a self-described Democratic socialist, beats a crowded field, which included the frontrunner for most of the race in the polls, former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo. ABC News writes that President Donald Trump on Wednesday again claimed total obliteration of Iran's nuclear program during the NATO summit in the Netherlands, escalating the pushback on an early Pentagon intelligence report suggesting joint U.S.-Israeli strikes may have set back Iran's nuclear program by only a matter of months. Trump told reporters speaking alongside NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte in The Hague, Netherlands, "I believe it was total obliteration." Preliminary analysis of the strikes by the Defense Intelligence Agency and U.S. Central Command prompted questions. Two people familiar with the report told ABC News it suggested the strikes did limited damage and that Iran was able to relocate highly enriched uranium stocks before the strikes occurred. That was from ABC News. After that meeting with the NATO Secretary General, President Trump held a news conference and again continued on this theme.
A statement came in from the Atomic Energy Commission of Israel, and I just wanted, this is an official letter, and they're very serious people, as you know. The devastating U.S. strike on Fordo destroyed the site's critical infrastructure and rendered the enrichment facility totally inoperable. It was devastated. We assess that the American strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities has set back Iran's ability to develop nuclear weapons for many years to come. This achievement can continue indefinitely if Iran does not get access to nuclear material, which it won't. It's so sad that that whole thing had to go, but I just want to thank our pilots. You know, they were maligned and treated very bad, demeaned by fake news CNN, which is back there, believe it or not, wasting time, and nobody's watching them, so they're just wasting a lot of time, wasting my time. And the New York Times, they put out a story that, well, maybe they were hit, but it wasn't bad. Well, it was so bad that they ended the war. It ended the war. Somebody said in a certain way, you know, that it was so devastating, actually. If you look at Hiroshima, if you look at Nagasaki, you know, that ended a war too. This ended a war in a different way, but it was so devastating. Also, they have, out of Dubai, just came that Iran's foreign ministry spokesman, this is Iran's foreign ministry, says its nuclear installations were very badly damaged by the American strike. So what bothered me about these reports with fake reports put out by the New York Times, failing, I call it the failing New York Times because it's doing terribly. Without me, it would be doing no business at all. But, and by fake news, CNN and MSDNC, all of these terrible people, you know, they have no credibility.
President Donald Trump at a news conference at The Hague, Netherlands, during the NATO Leaders Summit. And as the questions were asked by the reporters from various news organizations that he did not like, it continued. The president demeaned the reporters and the organizations. Here is NBC News Chief Justice and National Affairs correspondent Kelly O'Donnell. You're also going to hear an answer from Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth.
Here's another one.
Hello. closer. Thank you very much.
We got them all today.
Okay. So, Mr. President, you talked about expecting some on-the-ground assessments at Fordo and other sites.
Now
is that Israeli and U.S.?
It's been obliterated, Kelly. It's been
What is your message then, sir, to the intelligence community when they present reports? You're not disputing the DIA report. You're just...
They presented a report that wasn't finished. We're talking about something that took place 3 days ago.
I understand that, sir.
The report was done 2 days ago. Wait a minute.
Yes.
They didn't see it. All they can do is take a guess. Now, if you take a look at the pictures, if you take a look how it's all blackened, you know the fire and brimstone is all underground because it's granite and it's all underground. You don't show it. But even there, with all of that being said, the whole area for 75 yards around the hole where it hit is black with fire. The group that's run by this gentleman, in fact, you may want to talk about it for a second because we're going to issue a report. And I think it's not even a very exciting report at this point. It's been obliterated, totally obliterated. And they did a report, but it was like, if you look at the dates, it's just a few days after it happened.
Sir.
So they didn't see it. They said it may be very severe.
Understood. Do you have a message for the intelligence community, though, in terms of unvarnished information getting to you, that it's not...
I don't really have a message. I would say issue the report when you know what happened. I wouldn't say that it could be severe or maybe not. They use the word severe. It could be severe or maybe it's not. And so people like you picked up and said, oh, it's not severe. No, the report was not a complete report. Yeah, the message was probably wait till you know the answer before you...
And sir, did you not have a public component to your Zelensky meeting for a tactical reason with President Putin?
Let him answer this one.
Hello, Mr. Secretary.
Yeah. There's a reason the president calls out fake news for what it is. These pilots, these refuelers, these fighters, these air defenders, the skill and the courage it took to go into enemy territory flying 36 hours on behalf of the American people and the world to take out a nuclear program is beyond what anyone in this audience can fathom. And then the instinct of CNN, the instinct of the New York Times is to try to find a way to spin it for their own political reasons to try to hurt President Trump or our country. They don't care what the troops think. They don't care what the world thinks. They want to spin it to try to make him look bad based on a leak. Of course, we've all seen plenty of leakers. And what do leakers do? They have agendas. And what do? Do they share the whole information or just the part that they want to introduce? And when they introduce that preliminary report that's deemed to be a low assessment, you know what a low assessment means? Low confidence in the data in that report. And why is there low confidence? Because all of the evidence of what was just bombed by 12 30,000-pound bombs is buried under a mountain, devastated and obliterated. So if you want to make an assessment of what happened at Fordo, you better get a big shovel and go really deep, because Iran's nuclear program is obliterated. And somebody somewhere is trying to leak something to say, oh, with low confidence, we think maybe it's moderate. Those that dropped the bombs precisely in the right place know exactly what happened when that exploded. And you know who else knows? Iran. That's why they came to the table right away, because their nuclear capabilities have been set back beyond what they thought were possible because of the courage of a commander-in-chief who led our troops, despite what the fake news wants to say.
But you're not disputing the report said what it said, even though it was initial.
The report said what it said, and it was fine. It was severe, they think, but they had no idea. They shouldn't have issued a report until they did, but we've gotten the information. I think Pete said it better than you can say it. And, you know, you should be proud, especially you, should be proud of those pilots, and you shouldn't be trying to demean them.
No,
those pilots flew at great risk, a big chance that they'd never come back home and see their husbands or their wives. Let me just tell you, you and NBC, fake news, which is one of the worst, and CNN, New York Times, are all bad. They're sick. There's something wrong with them. But you know what? You should be praising those people instead of trying to find some. By trying to go and get me, you're hurting those people. They were devastated.
President Donald Trump and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth at today's news conference at the NATO Leaders Summit in The Hague, Netherlands. Secretary of State Marco Rubio also standing beside them. The questions coming from NBC News reporter Kelly O'Donnell. President Trump also said the U.S. will meet with Iran next week about a potential nuclear agreement, although he said he does not believe a deal is that necessary. And he said he believes the conflict between Israel and Iran is over. Quote, because I dealt with both and they're both tired, exhausted. Some other topics came up at today's news conference, CNN writing about them. NATO leaders delivered Trump a major win by boosting their defense spending targets. President Trump said, I came here because it was something I'm supposed to be doing, but I left here a little bit different. CNN writes that Trump's comments as he departed the conference suggested the ample attempts to woo him this week, including a centerpiece agreement to boost defense spending, had worked. Also from CNN, President Trump said a ceasefire with Russia was not discussed during his meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky today. He said Zelensky wants to see the conflict end and that he plans to speak with Putin to, quote, see if we can get it ended. More about Iran and Israel. Back in Washington, D.C., Congressman Ro Khanna, Democrat of California, co-sponsor of a bipartisan war powers resolution, held a news conference. The resolution would require the Trump administration to stop the use of any U.S. military force in Iran unless it receives congressional approval.
The fundamental point here is that we don't know what the strikes accomplished, but we do know a lot of the harm. Obviously, the public reports are the intelligence thinks that this just set back the nuclear ambitions by a few months. We need to understand what actually was even destroyed. And we know that some of the nuclear fuel was taken away from the Fordow site. And it has hardened the resolve in Iran to now race towards a nuclear weapon and sent that message to countries across the world. So you have a strike that is actually leading to more popular support now for the Iranian regime, that is leading Iran to declare victory, that is leading Iran to say they're now not considering being in the NPT, that they're considering kicking out the IAEA inspectors. It's cost our country billions of dollars. It's put our troops at risk. It has made us more entrenched in the Middle East. And all of that of doing something that the American people did not want. It is my view that the Democratic Party needs to clearly stand up against this war and take the mantle again of being the anti-war party, the party that stands up against wars of choice, against these endless wars in the Middle East. We have many, many co-sponsors, and I'm really honored and appreciate our chair, CPC chair, Greg Kazar, who's really jumped on this the minute that there were thoughts of strikes and has rallied not just the Progressive Caucus, but the broader House Caucus to stand against the president's actions and demand a vote on the War Powers Resolution.
Congressman Ro Khanna, Democrat from California, at a news conference outside the U.S. Capitol building in Washington. It's a story from Axios from earlier this week. Congressman Thomas Massie of Kentucky, the lone GOP sponsor of a resolution to limit Trump's ability to escalate in Iran, indicated he would back off his push to force a vote after Trump announced Monday that Israel and Iran had agreed to a ceasefire. But congressional Democrats are still forging ahead in an effort to send a broader message about Congress's authority to declare war. House Speaker Mike Johnson had already indicated he planned to block Massie's privilege resolution, which has over 50 Democratic co-sponsors. That was from Axios. And Congressman Khanna said the resolution will ripen, that is, become eligible for House floor consideration as a privileged matter in mid-July. This is Washington Today. From Reuters, U.S. President Donald Trump's nominee for director of the CDC was pulled into political contention over U.S. vaccine policy on Wednesday, describing the medications as life-saving and telling a Senate panel that she has not seen evidence linking vaccines and autism. If confirmed, Susan Monarez, a career public health official who served as acting director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention until her nomination, will report to U.S. Secretary of Health and Human Services Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who has long questioned the safety of vaccines contrary to scientific evidence, including suggesting a link between them and autism. That was from Reuters. Senator Bill Cassidy, Republican from Louisiana, chair of the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, asked the nominee about vaccines and the advisory committee known as ACIP.
People sowed distrust of the measles vaccine. There's 2 children dead in West Texas. There's a pregnant woman infected in Canada who lost her baby. because she was exposed to someone who had measles. She was not vaccinated, nor the person, obviously, to whom she was exposed. I'm pro-life. The loss of that life is tragic. It's all avoidable. To his credit, Secretary Kennedy has publicly said that if you're not vaccinated, you should be vaccinated. And that's a good message to the people in my state, because many of the folks who are influenced by this distrust voted for President Trump. They love President Trump. And so having a strong, clear message coming from the White House and coming from you regarding the importance of immunization, rebuilding that trust, is going to be really important. I am concerned, and the ACIP directly relates to you, of course, because the agenda will ultimately be approved by by you. And you will help decide, are we building trust or not? I will note that there are people who are critics of thimerosal who've been asked to testify, but no one speaking of the substantial evidence that in the amounts used in vaccines, thimerosal is safe. You had nothing to do with that, but I will say going forward, if the ACIP hearing today is being used to sow distrust, I would ask, as you go forward, that you would make sure that there really was a balanced perspective. And yes, someone can speak as a critic, but there should be someone who's reviewing the overwhelming evidence of the safety of vaccines.
Absolutely. This group, this ACIP, has a very vital role to play, and it must make sure that it is using science and evidence to drive that decision making.
And I think part of the concern is that the people on the panel, although scientifically credentialed, no one has the experience with immunizations, the kind of already knowledge to say, well, wait a second, the evidence that you're presenting, there's a lot more evidence to say it's not true. And so, again, that responsibility will fall upon you, and I trust you to help fulfill President Trump's vision of making America healthy again, which immunization is such an important part of.
Senator Bill Cassidy, Republican of Louisiana, chair of the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, questioning Susan Monarez, nominated for director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. A little bit more from the Reuters article on today's hearing. The hearing took place at the same time as a crucial meeting of CDC's Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices that reviews vaccine data for the agency and recommends who should get them. The Health and Human Services Secretary, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., previously fired the entire 17-member panel of outside vaccine experts and replaced them with his own picks. One left the committee hours before the meeting. Part of the Reuters article. Here's more from the hearing. The committee's ranking member, Bernie Sanders, independent from Vermont, also asking about vaccines.
Today, Secretary Kennedy announced that he will be ending U.S. funding for the Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunizations. You just a moment ago said that you believe, as I do, that public health saves lives. Ending U.S. funding, according to the Global Alliance, will lead to 1.2 million preventable deaths. Do you agree with Secretary Kennedy that we should end our support for providing life-saving vaccines around the world?
I believe that global health security preparedness is a critical and vital activity for the United States. As I shared in my opening remarks, I saw firsthand what happens when you have...
You did, and I agree with you. And my question, though, is, do you think we should end our support for providing life-saving vaccines around the world?
I think vaccines save lives. I think that we need to continue to support the promotion of utilization of vaccines. I wasn't involved in that decision-making. If I'm confirmed as a CDC director, I will certainly look into it, and I'm happy to follow up with you.
Thank you. Doctor, the American Medical Association has adopted a policy that, quote, recognizes the substantial body of scientific evidence that has disproven a link between vaccines and autism, end quote. The president of the American Academy of Pediatrics has stated that any effort to undermine decades of research finding no link between vaccines and autism, quote, poses a threat to the health of children and our nation, end of quote. Do you agree with the American Medical Association that there is no scientific proven link between vaccines and autism?
I have not seen a causal link between vaccines and autism.
Thanks.
Senator Bernie Sanders, independent of Vermont, ranking member on the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, questioning the nominee for CDC Director, Susan Monarez, at today's hearing. As mentioned, the CDC's Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices met for the first time today in Atlanta. As a CNBC article puts it, Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. appointed several vaccine critics to the group. The new chair, Dr. Martin Kulldorff, explained his approach to vaccines.
ACIP recommendations have an impact on the health and lives of Americans from infancy to old age. Nothing is more precious to those of us on this panel than our children and grandchildren. And likewise, we know they are nothing more important to parents than the health of their children. Our recommendations cover the lives of over 70 million mostly healthy children. Secretary Kennedy has given this committee a clear mandate to use evidence-based medicine when making vaccine recommendations, and that is what we will do. Vaccines are not all good or bad. If you think that all vaccines are safe and effective and want them all, or if you think that all vaccines are dangerous and don't want any of them, then you don't have much use for us. You already know what you want. But if you wish to know which vaccines are suitable for you and your children, and at what ages, then we will provide you with evidence-based recommendations.
Dr. Martin Kulldorff, new chair of CDC's Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, opening today's meeting in Atlanta. Today looking at data on COVID-19 vaccines and RSV shots. Panel expected to meet Thursday about shots for flu and other diseases. This is Washington Today. Travel news site Skift.com writes that the Senate Commerce Committee voted to advance President Donald Trump's pick for Federal Aviation Administration chief on Wednesday after some key Democrats on the committee said they opposed the nomination. Bryan Bedford, Trump's pick to lead the agency and CEO of Republic Airways, passed the committee 15-13, mostly along party lines. Now his nomination will move to the Senate, but he faces a more contentious path. Confirmations for FAA Administrator have historically been more nonpartisan compared to other executive branch positions. However, with Bedford, Democrats have signaled some concern over his previous stances on pilot training and other regulations. That was the article from Skift.com. Here are some of the remarks before the vote in the Commerce Committee. Ted Cruz, Republican of Texas, is the chair.
Bryan Bedford is a pilot. He knows aviation, and when he listens to FAA employees, he'll actually understand what they're talking about. I would hope that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, who were prepared to support the least qualified nominee for FAA Administrator ever, would be excited to support the very qualified Mr. Bedford today. This committee understands how important it is to have an FAA Administrator with actual experience. As we all know, in January, an Army Black Hawk helicopter collided with American Airlines Flight 5342, killing 67 people. It was the deadliest accident in the United States in more than 15 years. Family members of some of the victims are here today. I want to thank them for their continued advocacy. As the FAA prepares to overhaul the air traffic control system for the 21st century, the agency needs a steady leader with executive experience. We are preparing to invest more than $12 billion in air traffic control. This investment in new radar, telecommunications, facilities, runway safety, and other technologies will improve the safety and reliability of the system. It is a sorely needed investment, and it will take a proven manager to make the most of it. Bryan Bedford will modernize the FAA to meet today's challenges.
Senator Ted Cruz, Republican of Texas, chair of the Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee at today's business meeting. A note about that funding for improving air traffic control. There's a Reuters article. Chair Cruz on June 5th proposed $12.5 billion for air traffic control funding. But since then, Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy has urged lawmakers to add billions and said he supported at least $20 billion. Cruz released revised text Wednesday on the massive tax and budget bill that leaves $12.5 billion for air traffic control unchanged. That was from Reuters. About the FAA Administrator nominee, Bryan Bedford, here is Senator Maria Cantwell, Democrat of Washington State, the committee's ranking member.
The agency must tackle safety gaps and contributed to the tragic collision near DCA that took lives of 67 people and prevent future accidents. Yesterday, the NTSB met to ensure safety recommendations to address the critical challenges facing the aviation manufacturers that are coming off production lines at the highest safety and quality standards that we need to make sure are implemented. The Alaska Flight 1282 incident is a serious reminder of the FAA's need for a proactive, not reactive, oversight approach. The FAA needs an administrator who will be a strong cop on the beat. Unfortunately, I do not believe Mr. Bedford answered the Senate questions when we gave him various chances to ask how he would approach this job. Mr. Bedford, over decades, attacked the 1,500-hour rule as a pillar of modern aviation safety, and that we believe is a framework after the 3407 Colgan flight, and was given multiple chances to state for the record. But instead, he clearly would not commit to weakening the 1,500-hour rule. So for this and many other reasons, I'm not going to support Mr. Bedford's nomination, and I will put the rest of this in the record. But we clearly need to change the FAA in aggressive oversight and an administrator who will lead that.
Senator Maria Cantwell, Democrat of Washington State, ranking member on the Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee, at today's meeting before the vote, 15-13, to send the nomination of Bryan Bedford for FAA Administrator to the Senate floor. Associated Press writes a top Justice Department official nominated to become a federal appeals court judge said Wednesday that he never told department attorneys to ignore court orders, denying the account of a whistleblower who detailed a campaign to defy judges to carry out President Donald Trump's deportation plans. Emil Bove's nomination for the Third U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals has come under intense scrutiny after a fire department lawyer claimed in a complaint filed Tuesday that Bove used an expletive when he said during a meeting that the Trump administration might need to ignore judicial commands. Bove pushed back against suggestions from Democrats that the whistleblower's claims made him unfit for the federal bench. That was from Associated Press, and we will hear from Emil Bove at his hearing in just a moment. But first, this also came up at a hearing with Attorney General Pam Bondi, questioned by Senator Patty Murray, Democrat of Washington State, at an appropriations subcommittee.
Attorney General Bondi, we are in a deeply alarming moment where law and order is being replaced by chaos and corruption and really whatever Trump wants. And your department's independence and its capacity to do its job have eroded before our eyes. We have seen respected career officials who've been fired for doing their job. Thousands more are being pushed out with your buyouts and the threat of mass firings, and entire divisions are being eliminated, and grants have been canceled illegally. So I have questions about how and why those decisions are being made, and importantly, whether you're adequately resourcing DOJ to do its job. But before I turn to my questions, I do want to raise my alarm about the troubling pattern of trampling basic rights. Detainees, including U.S. citizens, being shipped overseas without any due process. Elected officials are detained for conducting oversight, and a U.S. senator gets tackled to the ground for asking questions at a press conference. This is not the country I know or the values I believe in, and I hope that colleagues on both sides of the aisle will agree with that. Now, to the questions. Yesterday, and I know that Senator Van Hollen raised this issue, a former DOJ attorney filed a protected whistleblower complaint accusing Deputy AG Emil Bove and senior DOJ leadership of defying court orders, including through, quote, lack of candor, deliberate delay, and disinformation, unquote. The complaint also accuses this administration of firing the whistleblower for, quote, telling the truth to the court. These allegations are deeply concerning. Now, I know you said that you can't discuss the case, but can you confirm that you agree that this administration should follow court orders?
We will follow court orders, Senator. The entire administration will follow court orders. The problem arises in the district courts. All these district courts throughout the country are tying our hands. And here's how we will follow them when we get to the United Supreme Court.
I need to ask
we're winning.
A number of questions.
And so, yes, we're following the orders of the court.
Let me ask my questions. Can you confirm you will not allow any conduct like what is alleged to continue at the DOJ?
I'm not going to talk about anything that's alleged. What I will talk about with you, hold on, you asked me a question and I get to answer it. What you asked me, alleged conduct that's part of a pending whistleblower lawsuit that was filed on the eve prior to Emil Bove's hearing today.
I'm not asking
highly
about that
suspicious.
case
Hold on,
specifically.
let me keep going.
Attorney
I would
General
run through a
Bondi,
wall
this
for
is my
Emil
time,
Bove
Mr. Chairman,
and
and I
Todd
would like to
Blanche.
continue with my questions. I have very limited time. Thank you. I just want you to confirm for this, you will not allow conduct like that at the DOJ. Yes or no?
I will always support and defend Emil Bove, and I will defend Todd Blanche. They are two of the finest people I know, and two of the ethical
asking about the
people
conduct.
I know.
Let me keep going here.
Senator Patty Murray, Democrat of Washington State, at an appropriations subcommittee hearing questioning Attorney General Pam Bondi. Emil Bove, former top official at the Justice Department, now nominated for U.S. Appeals Court judge, said at his Senate Judiciary Committee hearing today that the whistleblower is not telling the truth.
I did not advise any Justice Department attorney to violate court orders. The Deputy Attorney General, as you made clear in your opening remarks, Chairman, has confirmed that the account in that whistleblower complaint is not accurate. But even if that account is taken at face value, the whistleblower acknowledges that he left the meeting on March 14th of this year with the understanding that, of course, the department would advise clients to abide by court orders. And then, as you noted, the whistleblower signed a brief filed in the District of Columbia just weeks later, explaining all the legal reasons that in the JGG case, the department and the parties, the department and the parties the department represented had complied with court orders. And so for all those reasons, I don't think there's any validity to the suggestion that that whistleblower complaint filed yesterday calls into question my qualifications to serve as a circuit judge. I also think what's clear in the three cases that the whistleblower accounts for is that this is fundamentally a dispute about the challenges posed by the unelected bureaucracy to the unitary executive and to the people that elected the president and put him in office. And what I mean by that is throughout this complaint, there's a suggestion that a line attorney, not even the head of the Office of Immigration Litigation, was in a position or considered himself to be to bind the department's leadership and other cabinet officials. I don't abide that line of thinking in my management style, and I'm not apologetic of that.
Emil Bove, nominated for U.S. Appeals Court judge, testifying before the Senate Judiciary Committee that whistleblower Erez Ruveni said he was fired in April after saying in court that Kilmar Brego Garcia, a Salvadoran man who had been living in Maryland, was mistakenly deported to a prison in El Salvador. From the Associated Press article, Bove, a former criminal defense attorney for President Trump, has been at the forefront of some of the most contentious Justice Department actions since Trump's return to the White House, including the dismissal of the corruption case against New York City Mayor Eric Adams. He also accused FBI officials of insubordination for refusing to hand over the names of agents who investigated the U.S. Capitol riot and ordered the firings of a group of prosecutors involved in the January 6 criminal cases. Reporting from AP. Washington Today continues in a moment.
In a nation divided, a rare moment of unity. This fall, C-SPAN presents Ceasefire, where the shouting stops and the conversation begins. In a town where partisan fighting prevails. One table, two leaders, one goal, to find common ground. This fall, Ceasefire, on the network that doesn't take sides, only on C-SPAN.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you get your podcasts. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell begins an AP article said Wednesday that President Donald Trump's sweeping tariffs will likely push up inflation in the coming months, even as some Republican senators suggested the chair was biased against the duties. On the second day of his twice-yearly testimony before the House and Senate, Powell said that consumers will likely have to shoulder some of the cost of the import taxes. Most Fed officials support cutting rates this year, Powell added, but the central bank wants to take time to see how inflation changes in the months ahead. That was from Associated Press. Today, Chair Powell went before the Senate Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee. Here is Senator Pete Ricketts, Republican of Nebraska, asking about tariffs and inflation.
So if a tariff was put in place and the prices went up, wouldn't that be a one-time event, right? Because after that, it would be baked in. It's just a one-time thing.
So it might well be, as I indicated in my opening remarks, it might well be a one-time event, but that isn't a law of nature. You know, we would want to make sure of that. We were more sure of that back in 2018 because we'd had, 40 years of low inflation. Coming off of a global inflation episode where we haven't fully returned to 2%, it's something that's a question we will approach carefully.
But if the tariff is only put in once and just maintains the flat rate there, then how could that be inflationary in the second year?
Well, because it could be a process of many years. I mean, that's a couple of things. One is if it comes in quickly and it's over and done, then yes, very likely it's a one-time thing, like an oil shock, a one-time oil shock where the price comes back down, it goes through the system. It doesn't raise inflation, just raises prices once. But if you have a process that goes on multiple shocks for years, for example, or if the shocks are very large, that kind of thing. And I think, again, we have to be conscious of the current situation, which is people haven't seen 2% flat inflation for some years now, and it's different from what it was in 2018 when we had tariffs earlier, when we actually cut rates. Mm-hmm. So I'm not saying we're not reacting at all to this. It's a risk we feel like as the people who are supposed to keep stable prices for the benefit of the American people, we need to manage that risk too. That's all we're doing. We're not deciding what to do yet.
Yeah. So if Senator Warner's comment that a tariff is a tax, would that imply that then taxes could be inflationary as well?
No.
So what's the difference between a tax and a tariff then? Or do you disagree with Senator Warner's characterization that tariffs are not taxes?
I wouldn't disagree with that, but it's not the language I use. Look, this is, as I say, one time could be the base case, but in a situation like this where the process could go on for a long time, where the effects could be large or small, it's just something you want to approach carefully in a world where inflation is not back to 2%. And that's our job. If we make a mistake here, people will pay the cost for a long time. And so we're just approaching the question carefully. That's all we're doing. You know that, a majority of my committee has said that they do expect to cut rates between now and the end of the year in the remaining 4 meetings. So it's not that we're, taking a strong view that it will be inflation and not a one-time cost increase. It's just that we're going to take a careful approach to that very critical question.
Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell testifying before the Senate Banking Committee. The questions from Senator Pete Ricketts, Republican from Nebraska. President Donald Trump has been criticizing Chair Powell for the Federal Reserve Board of Governors not lowering interest rates now and has said he will nominate another Fed chair when Chair Powell's term expires next year. A reporter asked the president about who he is considering. This was at today's news conference at the NATO meeting in the Netherlands.
Bloomberg News.
Oh, Bloomberg. That's wonderful.
You were criticizing the Federal Reserve Chair before coming to this summit.
Yeah, I think he's terrible.
I was wondering if you've begun interviewing different candidates for the Fed pick.
Yeah, I know within 3 or 4 people who are going to pick. I mean, he goes up pretty soon, fortunately, because I think he's terrible. We have no inflation. We have a tremendous economy. Hundreds of billions of dollars of tariff money is pouring in. Factories are being built because they don't want to pay the tariffs, so they're building them all over the country. I think we're close to $15 trillion. I told you $5.1 trillion from the Middle East alone, but of investment money coming in. There's never been anything like that in the history of our country. But we have no inflation. And we have borrowing because Biden, stupidly, they did short-term debt. So we have borrowing coming up. And, we'll go 10 years, maybe longer, maybe shorter, but we'll go a long period of time when we do the debt. And because of him, because of this guy, we will have to pay for years. We'll be paying for him. And I said to him, listen, there's no inflation. He says, but maybe there'll be some. That's true. I said, if there is some, what you do is raise the rate. I'm okay with that. You raise the rate in 2 years from now or a year from now. But because the rate's high, we have to pay more for debt. It's pretty equal. In other words, if it's 4%, it's 4%. If you drop it a point, you'll pay 3%. So it's fairly equal, not necessarily, but fairly equal. So we're going to end up paying maybe 2 points or 3 points more. 3 points would be about $900 billion a year because of this very average mentally person. He's an average mentally person. I'd say low in terms of what he does, low IQ for what he does, okay? Wait, so instead of paying $900 billion, we don't want to pay 900 just because he doesn't want to lower the rate. I said, if there's inflation in 2 years or 3 years or 1 year from now, you raise the rate and you take care of the inflation, among other things. But he's probably a very political guy, I guess. I don't know. I think he's a very stupid person, actually.
President Donald Trump at a news conference at The Hague where NATO country leaders have been meeting. There's a story from Axios. When the Trump administration paused sweeping tariffs in early April, it promised 90 trade deals in 90 days that would fundamentally reshape the global economic order. With 2 weeks to go, there's one deal, one shaky detente, and maximum uncertainty about the rest. The Liberation Day tariff pause ends on July 8th. That was from Axios. Wall Street today, the Dow down 106, NASDAQ up 61, and S&P down a very small fraction, 0.02. Story from CNBC, the Federal Reserve on Wednesday proposed easing a key capital rule that banks say has limited their ability to operate, drawing dissent from at least two officials who say the move could undermine important safeguards. Known as the Enhanced Supplementary Leverage Ratio, the measure regulates the quantity and quality of capital banks should be keeping on their balance sheets. The rule emanated from a post-financial crisis effort to ensure the stability of the nation's largest banks. That was from CNBC. From the Washington Post, the Trump administration announced on Wednesday that the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development will be the first major federal agency to relocate its headquarters outside of D.C., with a plan to move about 2,700 workers to the National Science Foundation building in Alexandria, Virginia. At a joint news conference, HUD Secretary Scott Turner, Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin, and General Services Administration Public Building Service Commissioner Michael Peters announced the plan to move HUD to the building that sits near the Eisenhower Avenue Metro Station, calling it the beginning of a new era for the agency that oversees federal housing and development policies. That was from the Washington Post. And Punchbowl News previewing a hearing that C-SPAN covered. This afternoon, we'll find out how good a salesman OMB Director Russ Vought really is. Vought has spent the last few months sticking his finger in the eyes of congressional appropriators by freezing funding, dismissing their calls for more FY 2026 budget details, and floating the controversial use of pocket rescissions. Now Vought will have to convince skeptical Republicans on the Senate Appropriations Committee to vote for the House-passed $9.4 billion rescissions package crafted by the Trump administration. Several GOP appropriators have expressed concerns about the proposed cuts to public broadcasting and PEPFAR, a successful HIV/AIDS prevention program created under the George W. Bush administration. That was from Punchbowl News. Here's part of the hearing. One of those skeptics, the chair of the committee, Susan Collins, Republican of Maine.
I'm particularly concerned also about what the impact would be on the maternal and child health programs. We can't tell, but we do know that important food supplements, the ready-to-use therapeutic food that I'm showing you right here, which is peanut butter-based but greatly enriched, have saved the lives of premature babies and malnourished children. We know that these prenatal vitamins have allowed impoverished mothers in Africa to safely deliver healthy children. These are not only the right thing to do for humanitarian reasons, but they're incredible instruments of soft power. So let me ask a specific question. Does your rescissions package cut the life-saving multivitamins for pregnant mothers and the food supplement that's used for malnourished children?
No, we apportion that funding consistent with this administration's priorities, and that funding is flowing. What we are getting at is a preventative, and I do put it in air quotes. I'm not saying there's not good preventative care, and the example that you gave with regard to drugs that are being approved just this week in FDA are in another category of drugs that will largely be protected, certainly will under this rescissions bill. And again, there's $10 billion left for PEPFAR, even if this rescissions bill were to pass. What we're getting at is the extent to which we have identified in literally every program. Part of the exercise here is that all of these programs are in some respects in the dock because we have identified the extent to which all of them are funding liberal NGOs doing activities that the American people wouldn't support. And that just because they're in the PEPFAR account shouldn't make them immune for a rescission. And so when we look at preventative and we're saying in $9.3 million to advise Russian doctors on how to perform abortions and gender analysis, $4.4 in funding to recruit gender and inclusive development experts, $45 million to International Planned Parenthood Federation. This isn't the American people. If we went to a diner and we said, what is preventative care? And we included all manner of doctors in that diner conversation. And said, what's the kind of preventative care that you would support and you think would make sense? My guesses would be in the area of the drugs that you mentioned. My guess it would also not include this kind of waste and abuse. This is actual savings to the taxpayer that we could recoup, and at the end of this rescissions package, still have $38 billion in unobligated balances, $10 billion in unobligated balances for PEPFAR.
But Director, those kinds of wasteful expenditures are not going to occur in this administration. That's my whole point. And I know for a fact that both of these products, which are made entirely in America, are being held up.
Senator Susan Collins, Republican from Maine, Appropriations Committee Chair, questioning OMB Director Russell Vought about the $9.4 billion rescissions package. It's already passed the House, and rescissions have 45 days to pass the House and Senate, so the deadline is July 18th, and they cannot be filibustered. Story from NPR, Zohan Mamdani is poised to become the Democratic nominee for New York City mayor after leading in the city's ranked choice primary on Tuesday. The 33-year-old state assembly member and Democratic socialist was virtually unknown when he jumped into the crowded primary field last fall, but he had recently skyrocketed into the polls, fueled by in-person interactions, viral videos, and policy proposals that appeared to have resonated especially among younger and first-time primary voters. With 93% of precincts reporting, Mamdani garnered 44% of ballots, the most of the 11 candidates, and far more than the 36% of former Governor Andrew Cuomo, the one-time frontrunner. Cuomo conceded to Mamdani on Tuesday night, but has left the door open to run as an independent in November's general election. That was from NPR. The winning candidate celebrated a victory party Tuesday night in New York City.
We have won because New Yorkers have stood up for a city they can afford. A city where they can do more than just struggle. One where those who toil in the night can enjoy the fruits of their labor in the day. Where hard work is repaid with a stable life. Where 8 hours on the factory floor or behind the wheel of a cab is enough to pay the mortgage. It is enough to keep the lights on. It is enough to send your kid to school. Where rent-stabilized apartments are actually stabilized. Where buses are fast and free. Where childcare doesn't cost more than CUNY. And where public safety keeps us truly safe. And it's where the mayor will use their power to reject Donald Trump's fascism, to stop mass ICE agents from deporting our neighbors, and to govern our city as a model for the Democratic Party. A party where we fight for working people with no apology.
Zoran Mondani, Tuesday night in New York City after his strong showing in the Democratic primary for mayor. Again, from the NPR article, the primary isn't officially over. The losing candidates' ballots must be redistributed to voters' second-choice candidates until one of them breaks the 50% threshold, a process that is set to begin on July 1st. But Mondani's commanding lead sent a clear message and was enough for him to declare victory just after midnight. Again, that was from NPR. The current mayor, Democrat Eric Adams, decided not to take part in the Democratic primary and will instead run for re-election as an independent. He was on Fox News Channel this morning.
I'm still a Democrat. I'm running on an independent line, which the policy in the law allows me to do. You had one candidate that was running away from his record. You had another candidate with no record, and you have Eric Adams with a record. I delivered for the city, and we're not going backwards. We're not going into a place where we want to defund the police, don't invest in jobs, where we believe we can make broken promises that we can't deliver. I delivered on every promise I gave to
Mr. Mayor, it's not just defund the police. This candidate, Democratic Socialist, he wants to freeze the rent. He wants city-run grocery stores, social workers to replace the police because that's going to help. He wants $60 billion of debt fund for affordable housing. He wants free buses, no cost for childcare, baby baskets for newborn, and a $30 minimum wage. How can someone vote for this?
He's a snake oil salesman. Mm-hmm. He will say and do anything to get elected. Think about this for a moment. He wants to raise 1%. He wants to raise tax on 1% of New Yorkers' high-income earners. As the mayor, you don't have the authority to do that. You know who has the authority to do that? An assemblyman, which he is. He wants to do free buses. He could have done it at assemblyman. He doesn't understand the power of government and how you must making sure you improve your economy, raise the standard of living, and this is what we've done in the city. And I'm looking forward to being on the campaign trail and showing New Yorkers we can't go backwards. And New Yorkers never surrender or quit. I'm never going to quit for the city that I love.
New York City Mayor Eric Adams on Fox News Channel this morning. From Politico, shortly after former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo conceded the race, Vice President J.D. Vance posted on social media to congratulate Zoran Mondani as the new leader of the Democratic Party, previewing what will likely become a go-to refrain for Republicans as midterm season edges closer. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word and get the stories making headlines in Washington emailed to you every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.